He was the man who gave up everything for her success, his dreams, his career, his future. When she was done with him, she cast him aside like a worn-out shoe. At a glittering New York gala, surrounded by the city's elite, she decided to humiliate him one last time, mocking the quiet, unassuming woman by his side. She thought his new date was a nobody, a downgrade. What she didn't know, what the entire room was about to discover in the most shocking way possible, is that his new girlfriend wasn't just anybody. She was an icon, an heiress to a global empire, and her name alone could bring titans of industry to their knees. Ethan Cole measured his life in shades of grey now. His bachelor apartment in Hell's Kitchen wasn't sad exactly. It was muted. The walls were a soft architectural grey, the furniture a collection of clean lines in charcoal and slate. It was a space of control, of quiet intention, a stark contrast to the life he'd lived for 12 years with Brenda Walsh. Their life together had been a vibrant, chaotic explosion of colour, mostly dictated by her. When they met, he was the rising star at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in the world. He had a vision, a touch that could turn steel and glass into poetry. Brenda was a junior broker with a ferocious ambition that burned brighter than any skyscraper on the Manhattan skyline. He'd been captivated by her fire. She called his ambition artistic. She called hers necessary. The first sacrifice was small, a partnership track opportunity in the London office. "But my career is just taking off here, Ethan," she'd said, her hand on his chest, her eyes wide with earnest appeal. "I need you. We need you here." So he stayed. He designed from New York, pulling all-nighters, his name slowly becoming synonymous with brilliant but difficult concepts that other partners would ultimately take the credit for. Then came her big break, a chance to start her own real estate development firm. The seed money was immense. His savings, a small inheritance, and a loan against his future earnings provided the foundation. "It's an investment in us," she'd promised, kissing him, amidst piles of paperwork on their dining room table, the scent of her expensive perfume, Creed's Aventus for her, filling the air. He left some. He had to. Brenda's firm, Walsh Properties, needed an in-house consultant. In reality, he became her 24/7 fixer. He vetted blueprints, smoothed over zoning board issues with his technical expertise, and redesigned entire floor plans overnight to fit her ever-changing, profit-driven whims. He was the ghost in her machine, the silent architect behind her success. Walsh Properties boomed. They moved from a cozy West Village apartment to a sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue with panoramic views that made the city look like a carpet of diamonds. The colors grew louder. The parties became more lavish, the friends more transactional. Brenda traded her business suits for custom Chanel and her genuine laugh for a polished, resonant sound deployed for networking. Ethan found himself fading further into the background, the man holding her coat, the quiet husband of the brilliant Brenda Walsh. The end came not with a bang, but with a quiet clinical assessment over a $500 bottle of Chateau Margaux she'd ordered. "Ethan, we're on different paths now," she'd said, not unkindly, but with the detached air of a CEO analyzing a non-performing asset. "My world, it requires a different kind of partner, someone who can keep up." The implication was clear. He, the man who had built the engine of her success, was now considered dead weight. The divorce was swift and brutal. Her lawyers, sharks from a top-tier firm, argued that his contributions were those of a supportive spouse, not a business partner. He was left with a settlement that felt more like severance pay, a fraction of the fortune he had helped build. He was forced to sign an ironclad NDA, preventing him from ever claiming credit for his work on her flagship projects. He was in essence erased from his own history, so now he lived in grey. He'd started his own small firm, Cole Design, from a corner of his apartment. His work was picking up small residential projects and consultations, but it was a quiet, solitary pursuit. The fire that had once driven him was now just a pilot light flickering uncertainly. It was on a rainy Tuesday, seeking refuge in the Gagosian Gallery in Chelsea, that he met her. He was staring at an Anselm Kiefer painting, lost in its texture and raw historical weight, when a soft voice beside him said, "It feels like looking at a scar, doesn't it? A beautiful, terrible scar." He turned. She was wearing a simple beige trench coat, her honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, with a few strands escaping, to frame a face that was arrestingly beautiful. But in a way he couldn't quite place. It wasn't the sharp sculpted beauty of the models in Brenda's magazines. It was softer, more soulful. Her eyes, a warm hazel, held a startling depth. She wore no discernible makeup. "That's the perfect way to describe it," Ethan said, genuinely surprised. "I was thinking the same thing." They fell into easy conversation. Her name was Phina, she said. Just Phina. She spoke about art with an unpretentious passion that he found intoxicating. She asked him what he did, and when he said he was an architect, her eyes lit up. "You build things. You make tangible art that people can live in. That's incredible." No one had called his work incredible in a long time. Brenda had called it a means to an end. They talked for 2 hours, wandering through the gallery, until the staff began politely hinting it was time to close. As they stood outside on the wet pavement, the city lights shimmering around them, Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing so profoundly. "I don't normally do this," he began, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "But would you like to get a coffee sometime?" She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that seemed to push back the gloom. "I'd like that very much, Ethan." She typed her number into his phone under the name Phina. Their first date was at a small, no-name Italian place in his neighborhood. She arrived in jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and the same trench coat. She seemed fascinated by his stories of architectural challenges, of balancing physics and aesthetics. She spoke of her own life in vague but intriguing terms. She traveled a lot for work and dealt with difficult personalities. He assumed she was perhaps a corporate art buyer or a consultant for a luxury brand. He never pressed. He was too busy enjoying the simple act of being seen, of being heard. He didn't Google her name. Phina was unique, but it felt private, a name just for him. He respected that. For the first time in over a decade, he was getting to know someone without a balance sheet attached. He wasn't Brenda Walsh's husband. He was just Ethan, and she was just Phina. It was a fragile, beautiful thing, and he was terrified of breaking it. After a month of quiet dinners, long walks through Central Park, and visits to obscure museums, Phina brought up the event. "There's this charity gala," she said, swirling the wine in her glass at his apartment. "The Children's Legacy Fund. It's a work thing. I have to go make an appearance. It's usually dreadfully boring. It would be infinitely less so if you were there with me." Ethan's stomach tightened. Ayla. The very word brought back a flood of memories, standing awkwardly in a tuxedo, while Brenda networked fetching her champagne, smiling vacantly at people who looked straight through him. It was Brenda's world. "I don't know, Phina. That's not really my scene," he said, the excuse sounding weak even to himself. "Please," she asked, her hazel eyes soft and pleading, "just for an hour or two. We can sneak out early and get pizza. My treat." The thought of sharing a slice of pizza with her, after escaping a black tie event, was so incongruous, so them, that he couldn't help but smile. How could he say no? "Okay." He relented. "For you, but if anyone tries to talk to me about the commodities market, I'm faking a seizure." She laughed, a sound that filled his grey apartment with colour. "It's a deal." He had no idea that he was agreeing to walk back into the very heart of the world he had escaped. He had no idea that Brenda would be there, and he had no idea that Phina. His quiet, unassuming Phina was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of his old life, a bomb wrapped in Dior, haute couture. The muted grey of his world was about to be shattered into a million brilliant, blinding pieces. Preparing for the gala felt like putting on an old, ill-fitting costume. Ethan rented a tuxedo from a place on Madison Avenue, the process feeling clinical and foreign. The last time he'd worn one, it had been a custom Tom Ford, a gift from Brenda for their 10th anniversary. A gift, he later realized, that was more about her image than his comfort. He remembered how she'd adjusted his bow tie. Her touch, not affectionate but proprietary, as if straightening a painting on a wall. "Perfect," she'd said, looking at their reflection in the mirror. "We look like $1 billion." He remembered feeling like a well-dressed accessory. This time was different. As he adjusted the standard-issue bow tie in his own mirror, he felt a nervous flutter. But it was for Phina. He wanted to look good for her. She'd told him she would meet him at the venue, the iconic Cipriani on 42nd Street, a grand, cavernous hall that had once been a bank. "It's easier with traffic and work logistics," she'd explained vaguely over the phone. When Ethan arrived, the scene was exactly as he remembered and dreaded. A river of black cars flowed to the curb, depositing men in sharp tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. The air crackled with the sound of camera flashes from the press line, the murmur of powerful people greeting each other, and the clinking of champagne flutes. It was a pageant of wealth and influence. He took a deep breath, handed his invitation to the stern-looking woman at the door, and stepped inside. He scanned the cavernous room, a sea of black and diamonds under the impossibly high, ornate ceilings. He felt a familiar wave of alienation wash over him. Then he saw her. She was standing near one of the marble pillars, talking to an older gentleman, and she took his breath away. The simple, unassuming woman he knew was gone. In her place stood a goddess. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light. It was an architectural marvel in itself, minimalist yet impossibly elegant, with a single dramatic sweep of fabric falling from one shoulder. Her honey-blonde hair was styled in a chic, intricate updo, and delicate diamond earrings glittered at her ears. She was still recognizably his Phina, but she was also more. She radiated a poise and a quiet confidence that was nothing short of regal. He suddenly felt foolish for ever thinking she was just a corporate art buyer. As if sensing his presence, she turned. Her face broke into that warm, genuine smile that was just for him, and the goddess became Phina again. She gracefully excused herself from the man she was talking to and walked toward him. "Hey you," she said softly, her eyes drinking him in. "You look very handsome. A regular James Bond." "And you," Ethan stammered. "You look—" "I don't have the words. Stunning feels inadequate." She blushed, a faint pink rising on her cheeks. "It's just a dress, all smoke and mirrors. Are you ready to brave the lion's den?" "With you, absolutely," he said, offering his arm. As she took it, he felt a jolt of pride. He wasn't an accessory tonight. He was her date. They found their assigned table, mercifully, in a slightly quieter corner of the room. Phina seemed to know a surprising number of people. Not in the way Brenda knew them, with aggressive handshakes and laser-focused eye contact, but in a more relaxed, familiar way. People would nod respectfully as she passed, their eyes widening slightly in recognition, but they kept their distance. It was odd. It was as if she was surrounded by an invisible barrier of respect. "You seem popular," Ethan commented as they sat down. "I've been coming to this event for years," she said, with a slight shrug. "It's for a good cause." They made small talk, observing the glittering parade around them. Phina pointed out a famous actress, a tech billionaire, and a notoriously reclusive artist, telling Ethan funny little anecdotes about each of them. She made this intimidating world feel small and human. For the first time ever, Ethan was actually enjoying himself at a gala. He felt the tight knot of anxiety in his chest finally begin to loosen. He was so wrapped up in her, in the easy magic of their conversation, that he didn't see them approach. Well, well, well. Ethan Cole, I never thought I'd see you at an event like this again. The voice was like ice water down his spine. It was a voice engineered for public speaking and private condescension, a voice he had tried for 2 years to forget. He looked up. Brenda Walsh stood before them, a vision in crimson red sequins, a dress that screamed for attention. Beside her, preening in a velvet tuxedo jacket, was her new partner, Grant Harrison, a hedge fund manager, known for his ruthless takeovers and his collection of gaudy Swiss watches. His wrist glittered obnoxiously under the chandeliers. Brenda's eyes swept over Ethan's rented tux with a flicker of disdain before landing on Phina. She gave her a slow, deliberate, head-to-toe appraisal, her lips curling into a smug, pitying smile. It was the look she reserved for the catering staff. Brenda, Ethan said, his voice flat. He made no move to stand. I see you're back in the game. Brenda continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She ignored Phina completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. I'm so glad to see you're getting out. I was worried about you cooped up in that dreary little apartment. Grant chuckled, a moist, unpleasant sound. You gotta hand it to him, Bren. He's resourceful. Ethan felt a hot surge of anger. He could take her insults, he was used to them. But the way she was dismissing Phina, the woman who had brought light back into his life, was intolerable. Phina remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She simply watched Brenda, her hazel eyes calm and observant, which seemed to infuriate Brenda even more. Brenda thrived on reactions, on knowing her barbs had landed. Phina's serenity was a shield she couldn't penetrate. So, Brenda said finally, deigning to look at Phina, though not addressing her directly. She spoke to Ethan, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Is this your +1? It's sweet that you're trying, Ethan. Really. I know it must be tough starting over. Budgets are tight, I'm sure. She let the insult hang in the air, a poisonous cloud. The implication was clear. Phina looked cheap. She was a downgrade. The best a man like Ethan could afford. Ethan stood up at his chair, scraping against the floor. That's enough, Brenda. Oh, am I embarrassing you? She cooed, placing a hand on Grant's arm. Grant and I were just saying how important it is to maintain standards, in business, in life, in partners. She gave Phina another dismissive glance. You get what you pay for, after all. Before Ethan could unleash the torrent of furious words building in his throat. Phina moved. She placed a gentle restraining hand on his arm. Then she looked directly at Brenda for the first time. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through Brenda's venomous aura with the precision of a diamond. It's a beautiful dress, Phina said, her gaze fixed on Brenda's crimson gown. Last season's Balmain, if I'm not mistaken. A bold choice. The comment was delivered so neutrally, yet it was a masterclass in subtle destruction. She had identified the design of the season, and with one phrase, a bold choice, rendered it utterly passé. It was the kind of coded insult the women in this room used to destroy each other, and Phina had just wielded it with surgical skill. Brenda's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She was momentarily thrown off balance. Who was this quiet little mouse to know Balmain? And you are? Brenda asked, her voice sharp and brittle. My name is Phina, she replied, simply extending a hand. Brenda ignored the offered hand. Phina, how? Quaint. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Ethan could feel the eyes of the people at the tables nearby. This was exactly what Brenda wanted, a public spectacle to cement her status and his humiliation. But something was wrong. Phina wasn't wilting. She wasn't intimidated. She was holding Brenda's gaze with an unnerving, tranquil power. The hunter had become the hunted, and she didn't even know it yet. The stage was set. The audience was watching, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama Brenda Walsh could never have anticipated. The standoff was a miniature vortex of social warfare in the grand ballroom of Cipriani. Brenda, accustomed to being the gravitational center of any room she entered, was visibly irritated by Phina's refusal to be diminished. Grant Harrison, sensing his partner's frustration, stepped forward with the clumsy swagger of a man who mistakes money for class. "Look," he said, directing his words at Ethan, but gesturing toward Phina. "It's a big night, lots of important people here. Maybe you and your friend should find a more appropriate venue. The donor list for this event is quite exclusive." He puffed out his chest, his watch catching the light. "We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." The insult was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "You don't belong here." Ethan's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "We're exactly where we're supposed to be, Grant. Why don't you and Brenda go bother someone else?" "Protective Ethan? How noble," Brenda sneered. "It's a shame you didn't have that kind of fire when it mattered." She turned her focus back to Phina, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally loud. "A little piece of advice, honey. When a man has nothing, he'll cling to anything. Don't mistake desperation for devotion." It was a kill shot designed to poison Phina's mind against him, to paint him as a pathetic leech using a naive young woman to soothe his bruised ego. And that's when it happened. It started not with a shout, but with a gasp. A man walking past their table, a distinguished figure with silver hair and a sharp suit, stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes, wide with disbelief, were locked on Phina. "Mon Dieu!" He breathed the French exclamation, cutting through the ambient chatter. He rushed to their table, ignoring Brenda and Grant completely. He took Phina's free hand in both of his, bowing his head slightly, in a gesture of profound respect. "Seraphina," he said, his voice thick with a Parisian accent. "What a magnificent surprise. I had no idea you were in New York. We thought you were still in seclusion at the villa in Como." Phina smiled warmly at the man. "Antoine, it's lovely to see you. I wanted a quiet evening." Brenda and Grant froze. The name Antoine registered first. Anyone with even a passing interest in high fashion or photography knew the name Antoine Levy. He was a living legend, the man whose lens had defined beauty for 3 decades. His portraits graced the covers of every Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and Vanity Fair on the planet. For Antoine Levy to show this level of deference to anyone was unthinkable. Then the other name registered, Seraphina. It was a name spoken in reverent tones in the circles Brenda desperately wanted to conquer, a name that was a brand in itself. Brenda's perfectly made-up face went slack. Her eyes darted from Antoine to Phina, the gears of her ruthlessly ambitious mind grinding, refusing to process the data. It wasn't possible. The woman in the simple, elegant blue dress, the quiet woman sitting with her pathetic ex-husband. It couldn't be her. Antoine, oblivious to the drama he had just ignited, continued to beam at Phina. "Quiet evening, ma chérie. Your presence is never quiet. It is an event. You look breathtaking. Is this a new Dubois piece? Your father's work gets more brilliant every year." He gently touched the sapphire silk of her sleeve. The final piece of the puzzle slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. Dubois, the Dubois family, the French dynasty that owned a global luxury conglomerate. Their empire encompassed everything, from the world's most exclusive haute couture house, Dubois, to Parfums Dubois, to a portfolio of vineyards, art collections, and 5-star hotels. They were old-world royalty, a level of wealth and influence that made new money players like Grant Harrison look like children in a sandbox. And Seraphina Dubois, she was the face of it all. Not just an heiress, but a cultural phenomenon. A supermodel who rarely walked the runway anymore because she didn't have to. A woman so iconic, so elusive that her every public appearance was a global news story. She was known professionally by her first name alone, Seraphina. The face of the legendary perfume L'Étoile du Soir. The muse for her father, the reclusive design genius Jean-Luc Dubois, a woman who dated princes and artists, who was photographed with world leaders, and whose net worth was estimated in the billions. This was the woman Brenda had just advised not to mistake desperation for devotion, the woman whose date she had pitied, the woman she had just essentially called a cheap escort. The blood drained from Brenda's face. The crimson of her dress suddenly looked garish and desperate against her now ashen skin. She looked at Phina, at Seraphina Dubois, and for the first time she saw her. She saw the regal poise, the quiet confidence, the subtle but priceless diamonds, the bespoke gown that wasn't last season's Balmain, but a one-of-a-kind creation from the most exclusive atelier in the world. She had been so blinded by her own arrogance, so eager to humiliate Ethan, that she had been functionally blind. Word was spreading like wildfire. People who had heard Antoine's exclamation were whispering, pointing. Phones previously tucked away were being subtly raised over shoulders to snap photos. The low hum of the room was changing its frequency, reorienting itself around their table. A bubble of silence and awe was expanding outwards. The famous actress Phina had pointed out earlier was staring, her jaw slightly agape. The tech billionaire was murmuring to his wife. Grant Harrison looked like he'd been tasered. His face was a comical mask of shock horror and frantic calculation. He was a man who lived and died by status, and he had just mortally insulted one of the most powerful figures in that universe. He looked at Brenda with pure, unadulterated panic. Brenda, to her credit, tried to recover. It was a valiant but pathetic effort. She forced a brittle, horrifying smile. Seraphina Dubois. My goodness, what an honor. I'm Brenda Walsh of Walsh Properties. We are such admirers of your family's work. Her voice was an octave too high. The change from sneering condescension to fawning sycophancy was so abrupt it was sickening. Seraphina's gaze was cool. She didn't retract her hand, which Brenda now desperately wanted to shake, nor did she acknowledge the introduction. She simply looked at Brenda, held her gaze for a long, silent moment, and then turned her full attention back to Ethan. She squeezed his arm gently, her eyes full of a soft, apologetic light. I'm so sorry, Ethan, she murmured, for his ears only. I really did hope for a quiet evening. That small, intimate gesture was the final, devastating blow. In that single moment, Seraphina Dubois, the global icon, had dismissed Brenda and Grant as if they were nothing more than a temporary annoyance, a piece of lint to be brushed aside. She had publicly and unequivocally aligned herself with Ethan. The message to Brenda and to the entire watching room was crystal clear. This is my man. You are nothing. Brenda stood frozen, her hand still hovering in the empty space between them. The flash of a photographer's camera from across the room illuminated her face, capturing a perfect high-definition image of utter and complete humiliation. The Queen of Park Avenue had just been dethroned in the middle of her own court, not by a rival, but by the quiet girlfriend of the man she had thrown away. The rest of the evening was a blur for Ethan. The moment Seraphina's identity was revealed, their corner table became the epicenter of the New York social world. The gala's host, a formidable society matriarch named Beatrice Vanderbilt, descended upon them. Her initial annoyance at the commotion melting into effusive warmth the moment she saw Seraphina. Seraphina, my dear girl, you honor us. Why didn't you tell me you were coming? She boomed, air-kissing her with practiced ease. Her eyes flickered to Ethan, no longer with indifference, but with intense, speculative curiosity. Ethan felt like an exhibit at the zoo. People no longer looked through him. They stared at him, their expressions a mixture of awe, envy, and confusion. Who was this man? How had he a relative? Nobody captured the attention of Seraphina Dubois. He saw men who had previously ignored him, now nodding in his direction, their wives whispering behind their hands. Brenda and Grant had vanished. They had simply dissolved into the crowd, retreating in a state of shock. Ethan caught a glimpse of Brenda's crimson dress near the exit, her posture rigid with fury and shame. The image was deeply satisfyingly cathartic. Seraphina, with a grace that Ethan found astounding, navigated the sudden onslaught. She was polite but firm. "Beatrice, it's lovely to see you, and this is my partner, Ethan Cole," she said, her voice clear and proud. She put a subtle emphasis on the word partner, leaving no room for misinterpretation. She introduced him to Antoine Levy, to a senator, to the CEO of a major investment bank. To each of them, she presented him not as an accessory, but as her equal. After 20 minutes of this suffocating attention, she leaned in close to his ear, her breath warm against his skin. "Remember our deal," she whispered. "I'm officially bored of this. Let's go get that pizza." And with a final polite nod to their host, she took his hand and led him not toward the main entrance, but through a side door near the kitchens. A sleek black Audi A8 with tinted windows was waiting the driver, immediately stepping out to open the door. The level of discreet efficiency was staggering. Inside the plush leather interior of the car, as it pulled silently into the New York traffic, Seraphina let out a long sigh and kicked off her diamond-encrusted heels. She turned to him, her face etched with concern. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with genuine regret. "That was the last thing I wanted to happen. I wanted you to meet my world on my terms, not like that. Not with her." Ethan looked at her. The goddess from the gala was gone again, replaced by the warm, caring Phina he'd come to know. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, taking her hand. "But, Seraphina Dubois, the face of l'Étoile du Soir, I think I have a bottle of your perfume in my bathroom that Brenda left behind." She winced. "Let's throw that one out. I'll get you something better." A small smile played on her lips. "I wanted to tell you, I loved being just Phina. With you, I felt like I wasn't a brand or a name. I was just a person. It was the most real thing I've felt in years." "You're still just Phina to me," he said, and he meant it. "The rest is just noise." He paused. "Though watching Brenda's face when she realized who you were, I admit that was a pretty spectacular bonus." Seraphina laughed, a full, genuine laugh that echoed in the car. Her face was quite a picture. I almost felt sorry for her. "Don't," Ethan said, a hint of the old bitterness creeping in. "She wouldn't feel sorry for you." They got their pizza from a hole-in-the-wall place in the village, and Seraphina, still in her couture gown, ate a slice folded in half on the curb, while Ethan, in his rented tux, laughed beside her. A lone paparazzo, who had somehow tracked them, snapped a photo from across the street. The next day, that photo would go viral, the heiress and the architect Seraphina Dubois' downtown date night. It was a far more powerful statement than any red carpet appearance. The fallout was immediate and seismic. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Ethan's phone and email were exploding. Old colleagues from some who hadn't spoken to him in years were reaching out to reconnect. Headhunters from top architectural firms were suddenly interested in his boutique design philosophy. His small firm, Cole Design, was featured in a page 6 sidebar titled, "Who is Seraphina's Mystery Man?" But the most shocking communication came from Brenda. It was a long, rambling text message sent at 3 a.m. "Ethan, I can't stop thinking about last night. Seeing you there so happy, it made me realize so much. I was a fool. I was so caught up in building the business, in the stress and the pressure, that I lost sight of what was important. I lost sight of you. Grant he's a distraction, a product of that world I thought I wanted. It's not real. What we had was real. I miss you. I miss us. I know I hurt you, but I'm willing to do anything to make it right. Please, can we just talk?" Ethan read the message twice, a bitter taste in his mouth. It was a masterwork of manipulation. Not once did she mention Seraphina by name. She framed her sudden regret as an epiphany about him, not as a desperate, panicked reaction to his new partner's staggering status. She wasn't sorry for leaving him. She was sorry she'd left him before he'd traded up so spectacularly. It was the most Brenda thing she had ever done. He deleted the message without replying. The consequences for Brenda, however, were just beginning. The story of the confrontation at the gala, embellished and whispered through the city's elite circles, had cast her in a terrible light. She wasn't just an ambitious developer anymore. She was the cruel ex-wife who had tried to humiliate her unassuming former husband, only to be spectacularly shut down by a global icon. In a world built on image and perception, she had committed social suicide. Worse, the sudden spotlight on Ethan was bringing his past contributions to Walsh properties into question. An influential architectural critic, intrigued by the story, wrote a blog post wondering why Ethan Cole, a man Seraphina Dubois was championing, had such a thin portfolio for the last decade. He drew speculative but damning comparisons between Cole's early design style and the signature aesthetics of Walsh Properties' most successful buildings. The NDA prevented Ethan from speaking, but he didn't have to. The world was connecting the dots on its own. Whispers started among Brenda's investors. Was she really the visionary she claimed to be? Or was she just a ruthless marketer who had exploited her husband's talent and then cast him aside? The foundation of her carefully constructed empire, built on her singular image as a self-made titan, was beginning to crack. Grant Harrison, seeing the reputational damage splashing onto him, began to distance himself. A week after the gala, Ethan was in his apartment, sketching ideas for a new project, when his phone rang. It was an unknown number with a French country code. He answered cautiously. "Hello, medical. This is Jean-Luc Dubois." The voice was deep accent-scented and carried an unmistakable air of authority. "My daughter has told me a great deal about you. I believe it is time we met. I am in New York. My car will be at your address in 1 hour." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. The noise from the outside world had finally breached the walls of their quiet romance. Ethan was no longer just dealing with the ghost of his ex-wife. He was about to face the king. The hour felt like 10 minutes. Ethan barely had time to shower and change into his best suit, a charcoal grey, well-tailored, but a world away from the bespoke luxury the Dubois family inhabited. He stood at his window, watching the street below. Exactly 60 minutes after the call, a black Maybach, even more imposing than the Audi, pulled up to the curb. It was so sleek and silent, it seemed to absorb the sounds of the city around it. The ride to the meeting was a masterclass in silent intimidation. The chauffeur, a large man in a dark suit, didn't speak. The car's interior was a cocoon of buttery leather and polished wood. They bypassed the gleaming commercial towers of Midtown and headed for the quiet, old-money elegance of the Upper East Side, stopping in front of a magnificent limestone townhouse just off Fifth Avenue. This wasn't a hotel, it was a private residence, the Dubois family's New York home. Ethan was led through a foyer that was more like a private museum, with a mirror on one wall and a Giacometti sculpture in an alcove. He was shown into a library on the second floor. Bookshelves soared from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace, and in a high-backed armchair sat Jean-Luc Dubois. He was older than Ethan expected, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, yet he exuded more power and elegance than anyone Ethan had ever met. He didn't rise, he simply gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Cole, thank you for coming," he said, his voice the same deep baritone from the phone. His English was perfect, laced with only a faint aristocratic French accent. Mr. Dubois, the pleasure is mine, Ethan replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Jean-Luc observed him for a long moment, his gaze sharp and analytical. It was the look of a man who could assess the value of a company, a gemstone, or a person in a single glance. My daughter is very important to me, he began, his voice devoid of warmth. She is the face of our house, the heart of our legacy, but she is also a young woman who has lived her life in a cage, albeit a gilded one. Her world is filled with sycophants, opportunists, and men who see her as a prize to be won. He paused, letting the words sink in. You can understand then my concern. You appear in her life from nowhere, a man with a complicated past, a recent, and I hear, acrimonious divorce, a career that seems to have stalled for a decade. At each point was a precise, calculated jab. Jean-Luc had clearly done his homework. Ethan met his gaze. He would not be intimidated. Respectfully, sir, my past is my own, but it's not a secret. My career didn't stall. It was rerouted to help build someone else's success. A mistake I don't intend to make again. As for your daughter, I didn't seek her out. I met a woman named Phina in an art gallery. I fell for her intelligence, her kindness, and her spirit. The rest, the name, the legacy, that is your world, not mine. A flicker of something surprised respect crossed Jean-Luc's face before it was gone. A convenient sentiment. Jean-Luc said, his tone still skeptical. Many men would say such things. Perhaps, Ethan conceded. But I have a question for you, Mr. Dubois. Your daughter told me that for the first time in her life she felt she could be herself with me, that she didn't have to be Seraphina, or the icon, as her father does. That not mean anything to you? The directness of the question seemed to disarm the older man. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling in front of him. He was silent for a full minute. My daughter, she has a gift for seeing the truth in things, Jean-Luc said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. In art, in people. It is why she is not only the face of our house, but its soul. She tells me you are an architect of some talent. I like to think so, Ethan said. Our family's philanthropic arm, the Dubois Foundation, is planning its next major project. Jean-Luc continued, shifting the topic. A new museum for contemporary art and design in Brooklyn, a landmark project. The board has been reviewing proposals from the world's top firms. Snohetta, Renzo Piano, Herzog and de Meuron. He named the titans of the architectural world. My daughter has suggested that we review a proposal from you. Ethan was stunned. Phina had done that. She had put his name alongside the gods of his profession. That is an incredible honor, Ethan managed to say. It is not an offer, Mr. Cole. It is a test. Jean-Luc clarified his voice, once again sharp. The board is skeptical. You are unknown. Your firm is a one-man operation working out of an apartment. They see it as nepotism, a foolish whim of my daughter's. I have convinced them to grant you a chance. You will present your concept in 2 weeks. You will be judged not as my daughter's partner, but as an architect. If you fail, you will not only embarrass yourself, you will embarrass her. Do you understand the stakes? The pressure was immense. The opportunity was breathtaking. This was the commission of a lifetime, a chance to build something magnificent, to reclaim his name and his passion on the world stage. It was also a trial by fire, orchestrated by a man who was still deciding if he was worthy of his daughter. I understand perfectly, Ethan said, a fire he hadn't felt in years igniting in his chest. This was his language. This was his art. He wasn't afraid. He was energized. Good, Jean-Luc said, standing up, signaling the end of the meeting. Do not disappoint me. More importantly, do not disappoint her. As Ethan was shown out of the silent, opulent townhouse and back into the noise of the city, he felt a profound shift. The battle with Brenda was over. She had become a pathetic footnote in his past. The real challenge, the real future, was just beginning. He had 2 weeks to design a castle, not just to win the approval of the king, but to prove he was worthy of the queen. Meanwhile, Brenda's world was crumbling. The whispers about her business practices had grown into a roar. Crane's New York business ran a devastating expose titled The Ghost Architect of Walsh Properties. And while it couldn't prove anything definitively due to the NDA, it interviewed anonymous sources from her company and former colleagues of Ethan's from Seraphina. It painted a damning picture of a talented architect whose work was systematically appropriated by his then-wife. Investors grew nervous. A major pension fund that was the primary backer for her new flagship skyscraper project in Hudson Yards put a hold on their next round of funding, pending a full review of corporate governance and creative attribution. The project, Brenda's crowning achievement, ground to a halt. The banks started calling. Grant Harrison, who had co-invested publicly, announced he was pulling out of the deal and divesting from all interests connected to Walsh Properties, citing reputational risk. It was a brutal public betrayal, but one she had taught him well. Brenda was trapped in her Park Avenue penthouse, the panoramic views now feeling like a mockery. She was hemorrhaging money and, more importantly, status. She tried calling Ethan again this time, leaving a tearful, desperate voicemail begging him to release a statement, supporting her, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. She offered him money, a partnership, anything. Ethan listened to the voicemail, a sense of weary finality washing over him. He thought of the years he'd spent propping her up, the talent and energy he'd poured into her ambition. He thought of her sneering face at the gala, and then he thought of Phina's belief in him, of Jean-Luc's impossible, magnificent challenge. He deleted the message and got to work. He had a museum to design. The next 2 weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled creativity. Ethan's small apartment was transformed into a whirlwind of tracing paper foam core models and 3D renderings. The grey walls he had hidden behind for 2 years were now covered in vibrant sketches and bold concepts. The pilot light of his ambition had roared back to life, now a blazing inferno. He wasn't just designing a building, he was telling a story in glass, steel, and light. His concept for the Dubois Foundation Museum was audacious. Instead of a traditional monolithic structure, he envisioned a series of interconnected pavilions, each dedicated to a different medium: painting, sculpture, digital art, fashion, all flowing into a central sunlit atrium. The design was porous, intended to welcome the surrounding Brooklyn community in, rather than standing apart from it. The facade was a dynamic skin of photosensitive glass that would change opacity based on the time of day, making the building itself a living piece of art. He called it the Agora, a modern-day public square for creativity. Phina was his silent, supportive partner through it all. She respected his intense focus, bringing him food, making coffee, and just sitting quietly in the room, reading her presence, a calming anchor in his creative storm. She never offered an opinion on the design unless he asked, but when he did, her insights were brilliant. She spoke of how light would interact with a certain texture, or how a space would make a visitor feel, bringing the human element into his architectural vision. He realized her gift for seeing the truth in things was very real. They were building it together in a way. The day of the presentation arrived. The boardroom at the Dubois Foundation's headquarters was as intimidating as Jean-Luc's library. Ethan stood before a long, polished table occupied by a dozen stern-faced board members, including Jean-Luc Dubois himself, who sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Ethan was nervous, but as he began to speak, the nervousness melted away, replaced by pure passion. He didn't just present blueprints, he walked them through the experience. He spoke of light and shadow, of community and inspiration. He described how the museum would not just house art but foster it, with integrated studio spaces for emerging local artists. He showed them renderings of the building at dawn, at dusk, shimmering under the city lights. He poured every ounce of the talent Brenda had tried to bury into this one presentation. When he finished, the room was silent. The board members looked at each other, then at Jean-Luc. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. An older woman on the board, known for her sharp critiques, spoke first. "It's radical," she said, though not with disdain. "It's a departure from the monumentalism we usually favor." "Monumentalism can be a fortress," Ethan replied calmly. "Art should be a gateway, not a fortress." Jean-Luc stared at the final rendering projected on the screen, the Agora at night, glowing like a lantern in the Brooklyn skyline. He was silent for a long time. "My daughter," he finally said, his voice quiet but resonant, "told me you don't design buildings. She said you design feelings. Looking at this, I finally understand what she meant." He looked down the table at the other board members. "We would be fools to let this vision go." He then looked directly at Ethan. "The commission is yours, Mr. Cole. Congratulations." A wave of relief and elation so profound, it almost buckled Ethan's knees, washed over him. He had done it. He had won, not because of who he was dating, but because of who he was. The news of Cole Design winning the Dubois Foundation commission sent shockwaves through the architecture and real estate worlds. It was the ultimate vindication. Architectural Digest ran a cover story on him, hailing him as the visionary in the wings, finally giving him the credit that was so long overdue. The final nail in Brenda Walsh's professional coffin came a week later. With her Hudson Yards project in ruins and her reputation shredded, Walsh Properties defaulted on a major loan. The bank seized her primary assets, including the Park Avenue penthouse. The empire Ethan had silently built was dismantled in a matter of months. The last Ethan heard, she had sold what was left of her company for pennies on the dollar and moved to a smaller condo in Florida, a pariah in the city she had fought so hard to conquer. There was no triumph in hearing the news, only a quiet sense of closure, like closing a book he had finished long ago. 6 months later, Ethan stood with Phina on the construction site in Brooklyn. The foundation for the Agora was being poured, a tangible beginning for his dream. He was no longer in the grey apartment in Hell's Kitchen. He and Phina had found a beautiful loft in Soho, a space filled with light art and laughter. Phina, dressed in casual jeans and a sweater, her arm linked through his, looked out at the bustling site. The press still followed them sometimes, but it was different now. They were no longer the heiress and her mystery man. They were a power couple, respected for their individual talents and the genuine partnership they so clearly shared. "It's going to be beautiful," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "We're going to make it beautiful," he corrected her, squeezing her hand. He looked at her. His Phina, the woman, who had seen him when he was invisible, who had believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. She wasn't a status symbol or a prize. She was his partner, his home. He had lost a kingdom of glass and steel, built on ambition and lies, only to gain an empire of his own, built on a foundation of truth, respect, and love. The past was a scar, just like the painting in the gallery where they'd met. But looking at the future they were building together, he knew it was a beautiful, terrible scar that had, against all odds, led him here. And so Ethan Cole, the man who was once a ghost in his own life, stepped into the light, not as someone's shadow, but as a creator in his own right. His story isn't just about a shocking reveal at a fancy gala. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or designer labels. It's measured by integrity, by passion, and by the courage to be true to yourself, even when the world has tried to erase you. Brenda learned the hard way that when you treat people as stepping stones, you'll eventually find yourself with no ground left to stand on. What did you think of Brenda's downfall? Was it karma, or was it just business? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of vindication and unexpected love, please give this video a thumbs up, Share it with someone who needs a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama.